It all started on a rather wet Tuesday. I remember the day well. We weren't expecting anything spectacular. The team was surveying a remote peat bog, a place called Blackwood Moss, the sort of place where the wind howls and the ground squelches under your boots. We were looking for signs of an old Roman road, nothing more. Then, one of our geophysics experts, bless him, nearly tripped over something sticking out of the peat. It looked like an old leather strap, dark and gnarled. We thought it might be a piece of a horse's harness, perhaps from a few hundred years ago. It was interesting, but not earth-shattering. Still, you learn quickly in this business that you have to investigate everything. So, we started to dig. Very carefully, of course. You don't just go at it with a massive shovel. This is delicate work. We used trowels and brushes, scraping away the damp, dark peat bit by bit. The leather strap seemed to go deeper. Then we found more leather. It was part of a shoe, perfectly preserved. My heart started to beat a little faster. Old shoes are great, but this one felt different. It felt ancient. As we cleared more of the area, a human hand emerged from the muck. It wasn't a skeleton. It was a hand with skin and fingernails and wrinkles. A human hand, looking as if it had only been buried last week. The sight went completely silent. We all just stood there, staring. You can't prepare for a moment like that. We found plenty of skeletons in our time, but this was something else entirely. This was a person. You could feel it. Suddenly, this wasn't just an archaeological dig anymore. It felt like we had stumbled upon a sacred place, a grave that had been kept secret for centuries. We had to call in the specialists immediately. This was now a major find, one that required experts in human remains and preservation. We covered the area carefully to protect it from the air and the rain. We knew we had a huge responsibility on our hands. We had found someone from a very, very long time ago. The initial shock soon turned into a buzz of excitement. Who was he? How did he get here? And why was he so incredibly well preserved? These questions were flying around the team. We nicknamed him the Blackwood Man. The local authorities were notified, but it was pretty clear this wasn't a modern crime scene. The peat had stained his skin a deep brown, and the style of the shoe was like nothing we'd ever seen before from a recent period. We were looking at a time capsule, a direct message from the past. Our small survey for a Roman road had just turned into the discovery of a lifetime, and the real work was only just beginning. To understand our Blackwood Man, you have to picture the world he lived in. We're talking about 2,400 years ago, which puts us right in the middle of the Iron Age. In Britain, this was a time before the Romans arrived with their straight roads and fancy villas. It was a tribal world. People lived in small communities, often in impressive hill forts with massive earth walls for protection. They were farmers, growing crops like spelt wheat and barley, and raising cattle, sheep, and pigs. It was a tough life, dictated by the seasons. They were skilled craftspeople, working with iron to make tools, weapons, and jewelry. Their world was full of deep beliefs, spirits, and gods we know very little about. This wasn't a quiet, isolated corner of the world either. Big things were happening elsewhere. In Greece, philosophers like Plato were teaching in Athens, and the Parthenon was already a famous landmark. Alexander the Great was just starting his incredible conquest, spreading Greek culture all the way to India. Over in Italy, Rome was a growing republic, but it hadn't yet become the massive empire that would one day rule over Britain. There were trade networks crisscrossing Europe. People were moving, ideas were spreading, and goods like wine, glass, and fine pottery were being exchanged. So, our man might not have been as isolated as we first thought. Life would have been noisy and honestly, probably quite smelly. Imagine the sounds of hammers clanging on iron in a blacksmith's forge, the bleating of sheep and the chatter of people in a roundhouse. Homes were typically made of wood and wattle and daub, with a thatched roof and a central fire for warmth and cooking. Smoke would have filled the air. Their diet was probably quite plain but healthy, based on what they could grow and hunt. They made bread, stews, and probably brewed their own beer or mead. It was a life deeply connected to the land and the community. Your family and your tribe were everything. So, when we look at the Blackwood Man, we're not just looking at one individual, we're looking at a representative of this entire lost world. A world without writing, at least not in Britain. Their history wasn't written in books. It was told through stories, songs, and traditions passed down from one generation to the next. This is why archaeology is so vital. Finds like this man are our only way of reading the unwritten chapters of our own history. He is a physical link to these Iron Age people whose voices have been silent for over 2 millennia. He gives us a chance to hear their story. Now you might be wondering what the big fuss is about. Archaeologists find old bodies all the time, right? Well, yes and no. Most of the time, we find skeletons, just the bones, the soft bits, the skin, muscles, hair, and internal organs, all rot away over time. This is the normal process of decay. A skeleton can tell us a lot, of course. We can learn about a person's age, their sex, their height, and sometimes even about diseases they had, like arthritis. But a skeleton is an incomplete picture. It's like reading a book with most of the pages torn out. You get the basic plot, but you miss all the rich detail. The Blackwood Man is different. He is what we call a bog body. This is an incredibly rare type of archaeological find. Instead of decaying, his body was preserved. We're talking about skin, hair, and even his internal organs being largely intact. You can see the expression on his face. You can see the calluses on his hands from a life of hard work. This level of preservation is extraordinary. It's like he was put in a time machine. Finding a bog body is the archaeological equivalent of winning the lottery. Suddenly, we can learn things that are simply impossible with a skeleton. We can find out what his last meal was, for crying out loud. What makes him even more special is his completeness. He wasn't just a collection of body parts. He was a whole person, found with his clothing and other personal items. Often with bog bodies, they've been disturbed by peat-cutting machines over the years, which can damage them badly. But our man was found in a deep, untouched part of the bog. He was lying on his side, almost as if he were asleep. This gives us a single, perfect snapshot of a moment in time 2,400 years ago. It's a crime scene, a personal story, and a history lesson all rolled into one. So, while any ancient burial is important, the Blackwood Man is in a league of his own. He isn't just a set of data points for a scientist. He is a tangible human being who connects us directly with the Iron Age. When you look at his face, you are looking into the face of the past. It's a profoundly moving experience. It reminds us that these were real people, with lives as complex and meaningful as our own. They had hopes, fears, and families. The Blackwood Man gives us a unique, almost personal window into that distant world. That's why we were all so excited. Once we had carefully lifted the Blackwood Man from his peaty grave, the real scientific investigation began. This is where modern technology gets to play detective. The first thing we did was get him to a hospital for a CT scan. It's just like the ones they use on living patients. The scanner takes thousands of X-ray images and puts them together to create a three-dimensional model of the body, inside and out. This allowed us to look at his bones, his brain, and all his internal organs without cutting him open. It was incredible. We could see the structure of his skull and check his teeth without causing any damage to his preserved head. Next up was radiocarbon dating. This is a brilliant technique that helps us work out how old something is. Everything that is alive, from people to plants, absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. A tiny part of that carbon is radioactive, and it's called carbon-14. When the organism dies, it stops absorbing carbon, and the carbon-14 starts to decay at a very predictable rate. By measuring how much carbon-14 is left in a sample from the body, scientists can calculate a remarkably accurate date of death. We took a tiny sample of his skin and another from his woolen cloak, and both came back with a date of around 400 BC. That's 2,400 years ago. Then came the really clever stuff. We managed to extract ancient DNA. This is fantastically difficult because DNA breaks down over time, but the cold acidic bog conditions had preserved just enough of it. By analysing his DNA, we could learn about his genetic makeup. We could find out what colour his hair and eyes were. We could see where his ancestors came from, linking him to broader population groups across ancient Europe. It's like having a genetic passport from the past. We also used forensic techniques, just like you see in crime dramas, to examine his body for any signs of injury or disease. Finally, we looked at the chemistry. By analysing the different types of atoms, or isotopes, in his hair and teeth, we could learn about his diet and even where he grew up. Different foods and different geographical areas have unique chemical signatures. For example, the isotopes in his teeth would reflect the water he drank as a child, while his hair would hold a record of his diet in the last few months of his life. It's amazing what you can learn. Each of these scientific methods gave us another piece of the puzzle, helping us to build a detailed picture of this mysterious man from the Iron Age. Putting all the scientific evidence together, we started to build a biography for our Blackwood man. The CT scans and examination of his bones told us he was a man in his late 30s, probably around 38 years old. For the Iron Age, that was a pretty good age to reach. He was about 5 feet 7 inches tall, which was fairly average for the time. His bones were strong, but his spine showed some signs of wear and tear. This suggests a life of physical labour, perhaps farming or building. His hands confirmed this. They were not the soft hands of a priest or a lord. They had calluses and worn-down fingernails, the signs of hard, honest work. His health overall was not too bad. His teeth were in surprisingly good condition, though they were worn down from a gritty diet. This is common in ancient remains, as stone ground flour would have contained tiny bits of grit that wore down the enamel over time. He didn't seem to be suffering from any major chronic diseases at the time of his death. However, we did find something interesting in his intestines: the eggs of parasitic worms. This tells us a lot about the sanitation and hygiene of the time. It was probably a common problem, a constant discomfort that people just had to live with. It makes you grateful for modern medicine and plumbing. The DNA results were fascinating. They confirmed he was male and suggested he had brown hair and brown eyes. Genetically, he was very similar to other ancient people found in Britain from that period. There were no big surprises there. But the isotope analysis of his teeth and hair gave us a real shock. The results from his teeth, which formed in childhood, showed a chemical signature from an area over 100 miles away, in a region known for its different geology. This means he wasn't local. He had moved to the Blackwood Moss area later in his life. The isotopes in his hair showed he had lived in this new area for at least the last year of his life. So who was he? We know he was a traveller or an immigrant of some kind. His clothing, which was well made, suggests he wasn't poor. He wasn't a king, but he was probably a man of some standing in his community. A skilled worker, a trader, or perhaps a warrior who settled down. The analysis of his stomach contents gave us one final poignant detail. His last meal was a simple porridge or griddle cake made from barley and wheat, with some seeds mixed in. It was a very ordinary meal for a man whose final hours were anything but. It paints a picture of a normal day that ended in tragedy. This is the big question, isn't it? We know so much about his life, but how did it end in a peat bog? The evidence points towards a violent death. The CT scans revealed several injuries that were not old. First, he had a deep cut on his head, made by a heavy, sharp object like an axe or a sword. This blow would have been powerful enough to fracture his skull and would likely have been fatal on its own. But that wasn't all. The scan also showed broken ribs, consistent with being hit or kicked with great force while he was on the ground. This wasn't a quick, clean death. It was brutal. But there's more. Around his neck, we found a thin cord made of twisted animal sinew. It was pulled incredibly tight. The forensic experts believe he was garroted. The pressure would have crushed his windpipe and cut off the blood supply to his brain. This combination of injuries, a blow to the head, broken ribs and strangulation, paints a very grim picture. It strongly suggests this was not an accident. He was murdered. The question is, why? Was this a robbery? A fight that got out of hand? Or was it something else entirely? Something more sinister and calculated. One of the leading theories is that he was a victim of a ritual sacrifice. Peat bogs were powerful, mysterious places to Iron Age people. They were seen as gateways to the underworld, or homes for gods and spirits. Archaeologists have found many offerings in bogs, from pots of butter to beautiful metalwork like swords and shields. It's possible that sometimes the gods demanded a human offering. The triple death he suffered, a blow, strangulation, and being placed in water, is something that appears in some ancient Celtic myths and stories. It might have been seen as a particularly powerful way to sacrifice someone. Of course, we can't be certain. It could have been a simple, savage murder. Perhaps he was an outsider who wasn't trusted. Maybe he was involved in a dispute over land or livestock or a woman. Without witnesses or a written account, we are left to interpret the silent evidence on his body. But the nature of his death, combined with the special location of the bog, makes the theory of a ritual sacrifice very compelling. It suggests his death was not just a crime, but a deeply significant event for his community, carried out for reasons that were profoundly important to them. It's a chilling thought. So how on earth does a body last for 2,400 years? You can't just bury someone anywhere and expect them to be preserved like the Blackwood Man. The secret lies in the very special environment of the peat bog itself. A bog is a type of wetland where dead plant material, mostly sphagnum moss, accumulates over thousands of years instead of fully decaying. This creates peat. And peat bogs have a unique set of chemical properties that act as a natural preservative, turning the bog into a perfect time capsule for anything that falls into it. It's all down to a fantastic combination of three key factors. The first factor is the lack of oxygen. Bogs are waterlogged, meaning there's very little air trapped in the dense layers of peat. The bacteria and fungi that cause our bodies to decay need oxygen to do their work. Without it, their activity slows down to almost a complete stop. So, the main process of decomposition simply can't happen. The body is essentially sealed off from the air, much like food is preserved when it's vacuum-packed. This is the single most important reason why the soft tissues, the skin, the muscles and the organs, survived for so long. The second factor is the high level of acidity. Sphagnum moss releases chemicals into the water that make the bog very acidic, a bit like pickling vinegar. This acidic environment is terrible for the survival of those pesky decay-causing bacteria. It effectively pickles the body. A strange side effect of this acidity is that it dissolves the calcium in the bones. This is why many bog bodies have soft, flexible and demineralized bones, while their skin is tanned and leathery. The bog's chemistry preserves the soft tissues, but at the expense of the skeleton. Finally, the cold temperature of the bog plays a crucial role. The deep layers of a peat bog are very cold, even during the summer. This low temperature acts like a refrigerator, further slowing down any chemical and biological activity. So you have this amazing natural recipe for preservation. No oxygen, high acidity, and cold temperatures. It's this unique cocktail of conditions that stopped the clock on the day the Blackwood Man died, preserving him and his story for us to find thousands of years later. He didn't just die in a bog, the bog adopted him and kept his secrets safe. The Blackwood Man has told us so much, but the most tantalizing thing about him is what he hasn't told us. We don't know his name. We will never know his name. We don't know what his voice sounded like or what made him laugh. We don't know if he had a wife or children who mourned for him. Was his community heartbroken by his death? Or did they lead him to the bog themselves, believing his death would bring them a good harvest or victory in battle? These are the human details, the parts of his story that science can never recover. He is a person without a personal history, a face without a name. His clothing and the few items found with him offer our final clues. He wore a tunic made of wool, fastened with a simple leather belt. Over this, he had a magnificent woven cloak, made of different coloured wools to create a checkered pattern. This wasn't just a simple blanket. It was a high-status item that would have taken a skilled weaver a very long time to make. It tells us he was not a poor man. He had some wealth or importance. But was he a chief, a merchant, a warrior? The cloak is a clue, but it doesn't give us a definitive answer. It's another piece of the puzzle that raises more questions. Discoveries like the Blackwood Man fascinate us because they close the vast gap of time. For a moment, the 2,400 years that separate our world from his just melt away. We can look at his face and see a fellow human being. It forces us to think about our own lives and our own mortality. It connects us to the great, long chain of humanity. We are all part of the same story, just living in different chapters. He reminds us that behind the grand sweep of history, with its kings and empires, there were millions of ordinary people living their lives, just like us. And the story isn't over. As scientific techniques improve, we may be able to learn even more from him. Perhaps one day, new methods of analysis will tell us more about the diseases he was exposed to, or give us even more detail about his diet and travels. The Blackwood Man is a gift from the past, but he is also a gift from the future. He will continue to be studied for decades to come. He is a silent ambassador from the lost world, and while we may never know his name, he has ensured that he and his Iron Age world will never be